Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads. We begin another Erik point of view in Phantom, 1856 to 1881. My mind has touched the farthest horizons of mortal imagination and reaches ever outward to embrace infinity. There is no knowledge beyond my comprehension, no art or skill upon this entire planet that lies beyond the mastery of my hand. And yet, like Faust, I look in vain, I learn in vain. For as long as I live, no woman will ever look at me in love. Now that I have found the courage to turn away from the foolish echoes of human gladness, optimism, blind hope, pathetic yearnings, I have all let them go, one by one, and I am content as I shall ever be on this earth in my peaceful solitude. My kingdom lies in eternal darkness, many feet below the level of Parisian streets outside, shrouded in the chill of silence of the grave. Darkness and silence have been my companions since the day I turned my back upon the world of men and created an empire that was solely mine. From the moment of my birth, my destiny was to be alone. But it took me more than 40 years to accept the harsh and unrelenting fact, to understand where peace and resignation lay. I was not at peace when I arrived in Belgium in the spring of 1856. For 3 years I had traveled aimlessly once more through Europe, retracing old steps and old hands like some curious pilgrim, seeking out whatever architectural monuments I had missed as a wandering boy. I would sketch at dawn in the deserted streets and return to my lodgings before the early morning vendors began to sell their wares. And there I would lay, shunning the light of day until the sun sank beyond the horizon, and it was once more possible to step out on the poorly lit thoroughfares without exciting instant attention. I was no longer obligated to prostitute my talents in order to eat. The years in Persia had made me wealthy, rich enough to indulge my interest and my increasing aversion to the human race. There was no longer any grim necessity to entertain gawking crowds with the skill of my fingers and the horror of my face. My taste for death, already severely jaded by those grievous excesses in Persia, had been abruptly curtailed by an oath which I could not ignore. Nader's voice haunted me all across Asia, making me restless and uneasy in the Orient, where the political assassin is as much in demand and the ending of a life all too easily accomplished with no questions asked. I had learned to control my black and violent moods, first with opium and later in Belgium with morphine. I abandoned an opium pipe in fear of damaging my voice, and the surge of star-spangled euphoria, the result of my first experiment with a needle, I began to work upon the opera that I conceived as my maximum opus. I called it Don Juan Triumphant. I was beginning to grow very cynical. For once I drifted through Belgium, just as drifted through the rest of Europe, never staying anywhere for long for fear of hostility and reprisal. Antwerp, Ghent, Brussels, and finally lured by the soft familiar lilt of my native language to Mons. How good it was to hear French spoken everywhere. I had learned many tongues, but nothing compared in my ears with the seductive vowels and lovely rolling consonants of the most beautiful language in the world. I felt a sudden longing to settle in the eminently civilized land and build myself a house. The back streets of Mons revealed a man entirely suited to my rather singular needs, susceptible to my voice and willing to do my bidding without asking tiresome questions. A man I could control entirely simply by exercising my larynx. I learned by now that such men were found to be in most crowds, men who turned at my first words to stare with an odd glazed intensity that appeared to exclude the mask. I have no idea what freak arrangements of my vocal cords enabled me to reduce certain people to a state of trance-like obedience. Regrettably, it is not possible to perform dissections upon oneself, but I regarded my voice as a weapon, as a lethal in its way, as a Punjab lasso, and I never scrupled to use it whenever the opportunity was offered. Jules Bernard had completed his apprenticeship as a rough mason, and as soon as I was certain that he would be of use to me, he became my well-paid slave, handling transactions that had become distasteful to me as I increasingly embraced reclusive habits. Had I been satisfied with my house, our relationship would be no doubt have terminated with the placing of the last stone. But long before we reached the roof level, I was disillusioned with my design. Jules, instructed to handle the sale on completion of the building, was immediately besieged with a half-dozen truly ridiculous offers. Perhaps you might think of contracting, sir, he suggested tentatively. My first impulse was to laugh, but then I paused. Why not? I was still young. I badly needed an occupation, even if I no longer needed money. Something to take my mind from a composition which was consuming me steadily from within like a cancer. Don Juan Triumphant was eating me alive. I need to lock the score away in a chest now and forget all the dangerous and unthinkable things it represented to me. 5 years later, Jules, then a married man with 3 small children, tumbling around his modest rented quarters, was running a thriving business for me. The service I offered was unique in many ways. It was customary for an architect to arrange contracts, not to build himself. It was also customary for an architect to meet his clients, but this I steadfastly refused to do. My terms were eccentric. It's a wonder the business survived at all. But Jules revealed an unexpected capacity for smoothing the feathers of ruffled customers. It became fashionable to have a house designed and built by the mysterious, elusive architect who merely signed his plans, Erik, who had been known to refuse a commission rather than grant a personal consultation. In short, I was, yet again, a very successful novelty for which the wealthy were prepared to pay quite handsomely. After 5 years of this existence, I discovered I was bored to tears building glorified houses to fat, complacent businessmen and their even fatter and more complacent wives. A terrible restlessness was growing steadily upon me, a restlessness that seemed to be compounded partly by frustration and partly by an emotion I simply could not fathom. An urge to return to the land of my birth, which was primitive and inexplicable as the instinct which drives a salmon to return to its native stream. I'm going away for a while, I told Jules abruptly one morning. There is nothing here you can't handle, is there? No, monsieur, he said nervously. Even after all this time, he was not at ease in my presence. Will you be away for long? I cannot say. I would have left the mason's yard without another word, but he suddenly ran after me, almost with panic. Monsieur, at least tell me where you may be reached. I may need you. No one in this world needs me. No one ever will. You will manage, I said quietly. I trust your competence, and it's your interest to keep this business solvent in my absence. Tell me, have you engaged a tutor for your eldest son yet? Monsieur, he said, it is beyond my means. You have access to all the accounts, I said irritably. Why haven't you taken what you needed? The child is intelligent and deserves to be educated. He should be old enough now to learn to read and write, so see to it without delay. He stared at me in bewilderment. I would never steal from you, he stammered. Then you are a fool. He said, you have a fine family. Take whatever you require for their welfare, and there will be no questions asked of you. He was silent for a moment, his long, thin, rather anxious features set into puzzling lines. I guess I made to leave, and a second time he prevented me. Where are you going? He demanded with a sudden touch of fear. I stared past him into the dark street with unseeing eyes. I'm going to Boscherville, I said. I stood lastly outside the garden gate of the old house, staring, remembering. So many times in my imagination I razed this building to the ground that I was shocked to find it still standing. How dare it stand there in all its quaint, old worldly charm, housing a family who lived happily unaware of the grief I had suffered behind those ivory-covered walls. The tears I had shed in that attic bedroom, the lonely terror and fear of being shut away from the world forever. I hated this house. I wanted to blow it and all its intense memories from the face of the earth. I knew now why I had come to Boscherville. It was to remove this abominable disgrace from the landscape of Normandy forever. There was a light burning in the upstairs window, annoying evidence of peaceful occupation. I could not have simply set fire to this building without arousing the wretched inhabitants from their beds. No more murders, I had promised Nader, and even had I not promised, it would still seem a mean and shameful wickedness to kill innocent children sleeping in their beds. As I thought of the children, my hand closed around the wad of 1,000-franc notes. These people would be homeless once I had gratified my morbid urge for destruction, and no one knew better than I the fate that awaited the destitute and the homeless. I would drive no French child down the dark paths of decadence which had swallowed my own youth. I was willing to pay generously for this satisfaction, let them go away and talk for the rest of their lives to the madmen who had paid for the privilege of burning their house to the ground. I tethered my white mare to a tree on the opposite side of the road, and she wickered her indignation at finding herself bound. She had carried me across the plains of Asia without a single night spent under such restraint, and for me to deny her freedom now was to abuse the perfect trust that lay between us. Her eyes reproached me for the insult, but I dare not leave her to wander free this time. Fire is the greatest terror in the world to a horse, and a bolt of panic from her now would almost certainly cost me my life. Taking a pistol from my cloak, I hammered 3 times on the door and waited beneath the wooden canopy, secure in the knowledge I could not be seen from the bedroom windows above. Anyone wishing to satisfy his curiosity would be obliged to open the door. And since there was not a man on this earth I could not overpower with my freak strength and my singular knowledge of armed combat, I waited with calm that was almost indifference. There was a tub of flowers growing by the front door, but I reached out absently to remove a few strangling weeds that had gained a hold. It was always annoying me to see such a fragile bloom struggling for space. A light showed suddenly beneath the door, and heard the familiar sound of the old bolt sliding back. A rash and foolhardy householder this is, who really deserved to die for his stupidity. I stood back in the shadows as the door opened, curious to see how far this incredible recklessness was going to extend. Small wonder the world is full of rogues such as myself when idiots like this invite villainy every day. A candle wavered outside the step, and I froze in horror to find that this careless, ill-advised occupant was a woman I would have recognized anywhere, in spite of the gulf of years that lay between us. And when she turned to look at me with the wide staring eyes and one hand stealing defensively to her throat, her look of aghast recognition was almost unmistakable. "Holy Virgin!" she gasped. "Erik!" It was strange how deeply etched habits of childhood emerged from the white in moments of shock. I found myself automatically giving a stiff little bow and saying with cool formality, just as I had been taught to say all those years ago, "Good evening, Mademoiselle Padot. I hope you find you well." Both hands flew to her mouth now. She gave a strangled little sigh and burst into tears just a while for me to follow her into the house. I went with slow, leaden-hearted dread in the drawing room, but with spare no meaning. I now feared above all else. Apart from the shelves, the room was empty. The relief was so immense. the disappointment so acute that I had been sinking to the fireside chair for fear of falling. My heart was pounding wildly. I was afraid she must hear it, and I glanced at the brandy decanter on the chiffonier with intense longing, but she was too harassed to see my need that I could not bring myself to commit the gross incivility of asking a lady for spirits. It was bad enough to have sat without invitation in her presence. I gripped my hands on the wooden arms of the chair and struggled for composure. "Where's my mother?" I asked uneasily. She began to cry harder than ever. "You must know where she lives now. You need not be afraid. I shall not go there. But I should like to know." Again, the wild, fluttering hands brushed ineffectively at the gray and carroty hair. The familiar, quivering lips set and face was always reminding me of the startled rabbits. "Oh, God," she whispered. "I thought you knew. I thought that's why you had come back. Erik, your mother died 3 days ago." Wow. 3 days. That's gotta suck. Still, I sat there gripping the chair and willing away the threatening feel of darkness. Months I had spent trying to suppress the inexplicable, fierce impulse to return here. Drawn by the need to set fire to this house, had I come home, driven by a primitive intuition merely to put a torch to my mother's funeral pyre. She was here in this house, and she was dead. All I could think was the fact that now I should be able to kiss her cold cheek at last, that she would never be able to shrink from my touch again. "Perhaps you would like to see her," Marie suggested nervously. I ignored a suggestion which rocked the foundation of my questionable sanity and continued to stare at the fire. "Why did she come back?" I demanded. "She hated this house as much as I did. Why did she come back here of all places? Did he die? Was that it? Did he die?" Marie looked at me in confusion. "Erik, your mother never left this house." I clenched my fist on the chair. "Are you telling me they lived openly here together, that they dared to raise more children beneath this godforsaken roof? They were to go away. I heard him say that. After the marriage, they were going to go away where no one knew her." I was shouting now, and Marie's face puckered in folds of extreme distress, but I could not be calm. The thought that I might have half-brothers or sisters here in the very village which had driven me away all these years ago hurt more than I could have ever imagined possible. I could not bear to think what cruel children would have told them of their monstrous sibling. I could not bear to think of their shame and anger. Brothers and sisters who have never seen me, yet must have wished me unborn every day of their taunted lives. "How dare they stay here? How dare they?" The roar of my voice seemed to rattle the old oak beams in the ceiling, and Marie shrank in terror. "There was no marriage, Erik," she stammered. "Dr. Bargy went back to Paris a few weeks after you disappeared, and your mother never saw him again. She never remarried. She lived here in this house alone until the last few months of her life, where I came to nurse her. I was numbed and made utterly hopeless by this terrible revelation. I saw it all been for nothing. My flight from this house and all the horrors that followed, as I floundered deeper and deeper into a quagmire of unending self-perpetuating wickedness. God wanted nothing more from the abomination he had created in some careless moment of aberration. Even that childish act of sacrifice was now reduced to bitter mockery. There was nothing left to separate my soul from the rest of those eternally damned. And the siblings I had conjured up in a panic were just illusions. Just illusions. I had no brother at all. I was quite alone in this empty, echoing world now. There was no remembered tie of blood. Nothing. In silence, I went upstairs to my mother's room. Candles burned on either side of the bewaxed mahogany bedstead, the flames leaping and flickering in the draught from the open. This, then, was the light I'd seen from the road outside, a light shining in the darkness to lead me home at last. Slowly, very slowly, I turned back the sheet that covered her and stared incredulously, for the waxen face revealed on the pillow was the face of a stranger. old and altered beyond belief. Time ravages beauty and preserves plainness. I would have known Mary Pearl in any crowd. With this withered woman on the bed, I would have passed on the street without any recognition. Death had made her ugly, shriveled the flesh from her cheekbones, and sunk her eyes so deeply beneath her brow that there was now, by some bitter twist of fate, a real physical resemblance between us. And as I looked at her, I suddenly remembered her revulsion at last, because now I shared it. I felt no grief or anger as I looked upon her, nothing except a disgust which enabled me to forgive every act of cruelty that she had ever shown me. Yes, I forgave her everything that moment. I turned away without touching the hands that lay stiffly folded on her breast. I did not kiss her, now that I had the opportunity. I knew she would not have wished it, and I no longer felt any desire to do so. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. I'll see you next time.